Hey, grade 5 and 6 students, we are kicking off a brand new series called Stretch this weekend. If your faith were a muscle, how flexible would it be? Could it stretch to your knees, maybe your shins or your toes? Or are you not even sure you have faith that can stretch? Just like your body, if you want a faith that is strong, growing, and capable of carrying you through difficult challenges, you're going to need to stretch. No matter how far or not so far you think your faith can stretch right now, if you want your faith to grow, you're going to need to stretch it. This month, we're going to challenge ourselves to stretch our faith together. It might be fun, might be a bit challenging, it will definitely be worthwhile. But here's the key, whether it's your body or your faith, stretching only works if you commit to actually doing it. Little fun fact about me, I love bunnies and I've always wanted a pet bunny, and finally when I was 12 years old, I convinced my parents to let me have Chester, my pet bunny. And I promised my parents, I said, I'll feed him, I'll take care of him, play with him, I'll clean his cage, and I did that for a little bit. But after a couple of weeks, I kind of got lazy and I went back on my promise and I would not clean his cage as often. And eventually it got to the point where my parents told me that I couldn't keep Chester anymore because I had failed to commit to what I had said about cleaning his cage. And so they made me find a new home for him. I've learned that no matter what goal I'm trying to achieve, commitment is an essential part of the process. Many of us treat our faith the same way. We want results, but we don't want to commit to regularly doing the work that could stretch our faith. We get excited about following Jesus, but after a few days, weeks, or months, our commitment decreases along with our excitement. In Scripture, we learn a lot about how to stretch our own faith from the stories and words of the Jesus followers who have gone before us. One of those people is someone we've talked about before, Paul, a guy who experienced a major life change when he met Jesus. Paul used to be so opposed to Christianity that he was responsible for threatening, arresting, imprisoning, and even killing early followers of Jesus. But when Paul met Jesus, everything changed. He turned away from what he used to believe about Jesus and quickly became one of the most well-known leaders of the early church. Paul's life changed almost immediately because of Jesus. But unlike my story that I shared with you, Paul didn't fail to follow through on his new commitment. Paul committed to following Jesus with his whole life. Then he wrote letters to his fellow Jesus followers to help them do the same. One of the letters Paul wrote was to a group of Christians in Rome that we now call the Book of Romans. The goal of this letter was to explain that salvation can only be found through Jesus. Romans 5, verse 6 to 8 says, "When we were utterly helpless, Christ came at just the right time and died for us sinners. Now most people would not be willing to die for an upright person, though someone might perhaps be willing to die for a person who is especially good. But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners." Paul wanted the Romans to understand that Jesus could save them from their sin, their mistakes, their failures, their rebellion against God. But Paul also wanted to make sure that the Romans understood that salvation isn't just about eternity, it's about right now. Throughout Scripture, we see many people that made commitments to turn away from their old lives and start new ones following Jesus. In Matthew 4, verses 8 to 20, we read about a guy named Peter and Andrew. Peter and Andrew had normal lives and secure careers as fishermen, but everything changed when they committed to following Jesus. You might think it takes a lot of faith to just drop everything and follow Jesus, but this was just the first of many moments for Peter and Andrew that would stretch their faith. They made a commitment, and they spent the rest of their lives living it out. Years later, Peter and Andrew became apostles of the early church, sharing the good news of Jesus despite dangerous circumstances. Peter even became one of the most important figures in the entire history of the church. That's a big deal. and it all started with one commitment. Mary Magdalene was a woman who committed to following Jesus after he changed her life. But while it was probably fun and exciting to follow Jesus when he was healing people and telling stories, it got a lot harder when Jesus was imprisoned and eventually killed. But Mary was committed to following Jesus, so committed that she stayed close to him even after he died. While many of the men who followed Jesus fled and hid after his death, Mary went to Jesus' tomb to prepare and honor his body. We read this in Luke 24, verses 1 to 10. Because of her commitment to Jesus, even in his death, she was the first person to see Jesus alive again and the first person to share the resurrection story with others. Scripture is filled with stories of people whose faith was strong and who did big things for God. And so is our community. For thousands of years, God has been using people like you and me to stretch their faith. For the next few weeks, we'll talk about a few of the ways that we can do that, but it all starts here. Like Paul, Andrew, Peter, and Mary, you can stretch your faith with a commitment. Every week of this series, I'm going to ask you to make one of 5 stretch commitments. These are the 5 stretch commitments. The first one, show up. To start, maybe you'll commit to following along with our teaching videos every week and putting in the comments the things that you've learned, or maybe discussing with your friends and family who have watched these videos with you. The first step towards a stronger body isn't a 2-hour spin class. It's walking into the gym. The second stretch is to follow Jesus. If you've never made a commitment to following Jesus before, today is a great day to start that. Or maybe you've made a commitment to follow him in the past, but your excitement has started to fade, or you're having a tough time keeping your commitment going. If that's you, today's the day to get back into the game. No matter how many times we forget our commitments to Jesus, he never forgets his commitment to us. He's always waiting for you to come back. Our third stretch commitment is to love God. Maybe you already love God and you're pretty committed to following Jesus, but you want to grow in your relationship with God. Maybe you want to spend more time with God, or you're tired of struggling with the same mistakes over and over again. We'll talk more about how we can do this in the coming weeks. But today, you can commit to growing in your love for God. Our fourth stretch commitment is to love others. Maybe your relationship with God doesn't feel like the problem, but you could really learn how to love other people better. After all, Jesus said in many different ways that if we're going to love God well, we have to love each other well. Maybe the best way for you to stretch your faith right now is to ask God for the help you need to care more about others and love someone you struggle to love. And our fifth stretch commitment is to ask questions. If you're not ready to make any of these commitments right now, that's okay. If you have questions or doubts, or if you want to know more about why so many people have decided to follow Jesus, this is a safe place for you to ask questions. You may not find the answer you're looking for, but there might be something new for you to discover. Whether you've never made a commitment to Jesus before, or you've made commitments but haven't followed through, every day, including today, is a new opportunity to start. If you want your faith to grow and be strengthened, it doesn't happen overnight. It has to start somewhere, and it can start today with a simple stretch. You can stretch your faith with a commitment.